Hi, everybody. I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. For the next hour, you and I are going to get into it with all of our correspondents, analysts, anchors all across the country, in fact, all around the world. We're going to begin this morning with President Trump's new tariffs, which kick into effect this week. We've got team coverage, and we're going to tell you what you need to know and, more importantly, how the stock markets are responding. And hundreds of Tesla takedown protests erupt across the nation as demonstrators rail against Elon Musk's effort to slash spending in the federal government. We're going to show you some of them. Plus, a major storm system that tore across the South that's making its way up the East Coast this morning. We are tracking the damage and, more importantly, the severe forecast that's in store for millions of people all across the country today. This is CBS News 24/7. President Trump this morning is touting the new trade tariffs that are set to roll out this week. He says the new tariffs will hit all countries, not just those that have the biggest trade imbalance with the United States. This is on top of those auto tariffs that went into effect last week. Listen.
We're going to raise about $100 billion with the auto tariffs alone. What we're going to do is, in the new tax bill that has to pass, it absolutely has to pass, we're going to provide tax benefits, tax credits to the people who buy American cars. This is a genius thing that President Trump promised on the campaign trail. So that's going to happen. In addition, the other tariffs are going to raise about $600 billion a year, about $6 trillion over a 10-year period. And we're going to have tax cuts. It's the biggest tax cut in American history for the middle class, for the blue collar.
All right, so that's the administration's line, but new CBS polling shows Americans' views of the economy are souring. Most say President Trump has focused too much on tariffs, which they believe will end up raising prices, and he hasn't spent enough time lowering prices, or at least attempting to lower prices. So let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro, who's tracking developments for us this morning. Aaron, remind us exactly what tariffs will be implemented on Wednesday.
Vlad, good to be with you. If you remember, President Trump, a couple weeks ago, paused tariffs on Canada, on Mexico, 25% tariffs on a wide swath of things from agriculture to clothing. That will resume on April 2nd. But the main thing is reciprocal tariffs. This is something that President Trump has been talking about for a while, where essentially the U.S. will match tariffs levied by other countries. Some countries that have big imbalances with the U.S. include Brazil, India, and Vietnam. But Trump has also looked to Europe as a region where the imbalance is pretty high. The U.S. will be matching those tariffs, though Trump told reporters last night that he will, quote, be more generous than people are expecting, suggesting that there could be exceptions that could be worked out between the U.S. and other countries. And later this week on Thursday, there will be that 25% tariff on auto cars and auto parts made outside of the United States. That'll impact nearly every vehicle, since there aren't many that are completely made within the United States.
CBS polling, Aaron, we told our viewers, shows that more than half of Americans think that the president should be focused more on the price of goods and trying to lower those prices. How is he trying to sort of quell those financial fears that people have out there now?
Yeah, and a slight majority, 55%, believe he's focusing too much on tariffs, not enough on lowering prices. There's an increase, too, from January of people who say that Trump's policies could make them financially worse off. Obviously, a departure from when he ran in 2024. Trump has said that fixing the trade imbalance between the U.S. and other countries, which his base has called for, is a positive for the country. His continuous call from him and the administration for industries and manufacturers to move inside the United States, create jobs, is another spin that they're putting on. And you played a clip of his trade counselor, Peter Navarro, the administration's expectation that they will be able to extend his 2017 tax cuts, and that will help lower the middle class individuals inside the U.S. is also a reason that they think this tariff war will not impact people as negatively as some of the stock prices are showing.
Yeah, but now, Aaron, has the president sort of responded to the fact that he can control these companies to move their factories and manufacturing here to the United States? But that's going to take years. And in the meantime, we could see lower prices. We could see even a recession. So how's the president addressing that?
Yeah, that seems to be why they're leaning so hard on the tax cuts, which they're hoping to pass in the next couple of months or weeks. But that certainly is something that he has not addressed specifically, just generally that he believes that the U.S. is, quote, entering a golden age. But you're right in that many consumers within the country who will be impacted by these tariffs this week could take a while to actually see that effect.
All right, Aaron Navarro reporting from the White House this morning for us. Thank you very much. Let us bring in CBS News contributor J.D. Durkin to talk a little bit more about this. So first of all, J.D., how are the markets responding to this?
Yeah, not very positively, Vlad. We've had this really a series of knee-jerk reactions, and of course, the S&P 500 is coming off of a correction, which is defined as a 10% pullback off of its recent highs. And we had those highs in the market on February 19th, and then we had recent lows down at March 13th. And quite frankly, a lot of agita in the system. Every time there is a new suggestion or a new announcement of a tit-for-tat tariff policy out of the White House, you tend to see markets sell off in reaction. And then whenever the White House or the Commerce Secretary, Mr. Lutnick, or others, or Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent come out to the microphones and say, well, maybe the president's willing to pull a few tariff punches and things may be less scary than previously expected, we tend to see the markets rebalance. But all of this is a repricing of risk across the stock market. And I think a lot of the pain is being priced in before the damage actually occurs, which, as we know, is set to go into effect Thursday morning at 12:01 a.m.
So, as you also know, the president announced these tariffs on foreign vehicles, but the head of the United Auto Workers Union says down the road, this could actually be a good thing. Let's play some of that.
We've seen over 90,000 manufacturing facilities leave the United States. We've seen, in the big three alone in the last 20 plus years, 65 plants have closed. Tariffs are a tool in the toolbox to get these companies to do the right thing, and the intent behind it is to bring jobs back here.
All right, so that's the head of a union, and you can understand, of course, why a union chief would want those jobs back here in the United States. That means more jobs for Americans, which is a good thing. But the bottom line is the reason why those automakers first moved the manufacturing overseas, explain that to our viewers, why that became necessary. And secondly, what are we looking at in the short term? Because it takes years to build up those plants, to hire those people. Trump might be out of office by the time all this goes into effect.
It's a very long runway for capital investment, Vlad. These announcements are very exciting, and they might move markets in the short term and certainly gin up a lot of enthusiasm. But to actually build these manufacturing plants, that cost of capital is a very long time before it ultimately gets realized. I think the major automakers, like a lot of other major American companies, have recognized, especially if they're publicly traded companies, their best bet at revenue and forward-looking earnings and guidance is to offshore as much production as they possibly can. And let's be clear, the big three automakers, their stocks, at least through the lens of the market, Vlad, they've gotten hammered year to date. GM stock is down 10%. Stellantis, which makes names like Dodge and Chrysler, that stock is down 13%. All of this says nothing about the Tesla conundrum, Elon Musk's company, which is down more than 35% year to date. No big surprise that the big three, which includes GM, Stellantis, and Ford, were able to get a bit of a reprieve off of those tariffs, that kind of 1 month delay. But those pressure points are certainly going to be in effect. And I think much like the rest of the market, investors are in wait and see mode for the actual specifics, because here we were going into yesterday sort of assuming that it would be a basket of countries that would be on the receiving end of the tit for tat tariff policy. And yet we had the president there on Marine One say, well, really, you need to start with all countries. And that accelerated losses in the stock market into this morning. So we continue to wait and see. And I think everyone, including the major automakers, they really want that clarity on what tariff policy is going to look like moving forward.
Yeah, historically, trade wars don't benefit anybody, as you know, JD. But let's ask, how is this affecting, or how will it potentially affect monetary policy vis-a-vis the Fed?
Well, we still got a handful of meetings left. I think the next one is coming up on May 7th, so about 4 or 5 weeks away. The central bank is going to be in an interesting position here, because it might be unthinkable to investors in the market or market participants that the Fed may actually be forced to raise interest rates. But of course, if there is a deterioration in labor market conditions, if something goes sideways, or if we have an unexpected spike in inflation, that will probably force the Fed and their hand to consider another short-term interest rate hike. Not what markets want, and the forecast from the Fed is still expecting probably 2 rate cuts between now and the end of the year. But we have a consumer who is spending less than they have. So we're seeing consumer spending drop. We're seeing credit card debt on the rise, credit card delinquency on the rise. And Vlad, as you talked about at the top of the hour, just the state of consumer confidence is down. People feel very sour about their personal economic situation. That could translate to a pullback in consumer spending, which, as we know, accounts for 70% of the entire American economy. So even those feelings, those perceptions of unease will likely have some pretty significant economic repercussions, at least in the next couple of quarters.
Some stark numbers there. J.D. Durkin breaking it down for us. Thank you, J.D. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, moving on now to this. Rescue crews are racing to find survivors in the rubble left by the powerful 7.7 magnitude earthquake that was felt in Myanmar on Friday. The official death toll in the country has now reached more than 2,000 people. Hundreds of miles away in Thailand, dozens are still missing after a high-rise building collapsed during the quake in Bangkok. CBS News foreign correspondent Anna Corin has more.
Lying on his stomach, aided by torchlight, the rescuer detects signs of life. It's been days since a deadly earthquake struck Myanmar, but remarkably, this woman is lifted out of the rubble unscathed. She was among a handful of survivors to be rescued, along with this man, sandwiched between slabs of concrete.
Hello.
But they are the lucky ones, as building after building in Myanmar's second largest city, Mandalay, and beyond lie in ruins. Damaged roads, bridges and downed power lines have made it impossible for rescue teams to reach communities in this impoverished country. Engulfed by 4 years of civil war since the military junta seized power in a coup. Hours after the earthquake, reports the junta carried out airstrikes in rebel-controlled areas that had also been impacted, adding to the misery. So far, China, Russia and India have responded with humanitarian aid and teams on the ground, along with other regional neighbours. President Trump said the US will be helping. But once the face of international disaster relief, the US government's cuts to USAID and State Department programs could be felt acutely by Myanmar's earthquake victims, in a country now grappling with a humanitarian crisis. Meanwhile, in Thailand, hope is fading at the construction site, where dozens of workers were buried when the skyscraper collapsed moments after the earthquake hit. Rescue crews, with the help of cadaver dogs, continue to retrieve bodies as families keep vigil, refusing to lose faith their loved ones will be found alive. Anna Corin, CBS News, Hong Kong.
Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands are without power across parts of the South and Midwest following storms that produced tornadoes and hail nearly the size of tennis balls. Today, that same system will march from Florida, the Panhandle, all the way to parts of upstate New York. CBS News correspondent Nicole Valdez is in Lexington, Tennessee this morning for us. Nicole, describe the conditions that you are seeing today and what you saw earlier.
Vlad, good morning. Well, it's going to be all about the cleanup for so many communities that were under those severe storm threats overnight. You can imagine a terrifying night for so many here in Lexington, Kentucky. The fear really emerged when you heard likely and saw this tree come crashing down. This is just one family's home. This is just one of more than 500 severe storm reports that we've heard of spanning across 10 states. But inside this home, a family of 4 raced down into their basement just moments before that tree came crashing down. We know these storms really wreaked havoc across so many areas, not only really getting torrential rain down, but massive hail and strong winds up to 80-mile-per-hour gusts in some areas across the Midwest. So we are talking about a wide sense of people all the way as far south as Alabama and as far north as Michigan that are trying to recover from yet another weekend of severe storms. Vlad.
All right, Nicole, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Kate Vallow with the first look at the national forecast. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Vlad. Good morning. Yeah, that same system, that same deadly cold front really is bringing storms this morning to portions of the deep south and eventually to the eastern seaboard. Let's take a look at where it is right now. We'll talk about current radar and watches and warnings, and then I'll take you through the timing for the rest of the day. Here's the front we're talking about, moving through portions of southern Louisiana, southern Mississippi, headed quickly for Mobile, Alabama right now. You can see this line of gusty storms, and the blue in its wake, those are flash flood warnings. Out ahead of it, we have severe thunderstorm warnings for areas just south and east of New Orleans, and this is going to continue throughout the day. So I do want to pull up our national map here and take you through the timing of this. We're going to be seeing a severe threat really maximized today across portions of the deep south, from the Carolinas down into Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, where you see this kind of orange shading here. That is an enhanced risk, a level 3 out of 5 for severe weather. And as we take a look at the timing, let's take you through the next 24 hours or so. You can see this is then going to build further north as well. By later on this evening, we'll see heavy rain, thunderstorms, and even the threat for severe weather in cities like New York City and Philadelphia. And then another round of severe weather to talk about tomorrow for the plains. I'll have more on that coming up in just a little bit. Vlad, back over to you.
All right, Kate, we'll check in with you a bit later. Thank you. There was not one, but two close calls at D.C.'s Reagan National Airport this weekend. What we know about these latest incidents and the latest warnings about airline safety at that specific airport. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Israel has reportedly put forward a proposal for a new ceasefire in Gaza in exchange for about half of the remaining hostages still held by Hamas in the enclave. That's according to Reuters. This comes as the Israeli military issued new evacuation orders this morning covering most of Gaza's southern city of Rafah and advising civilians to head to the Al-Musawi area on the enclave's coast. So let's bring in CBS News contributor Robert Berger, who's in Jerusalem to talk more about this. Robert, so let's talk about first this evacuation order and what it says about the state of negotiations right now.
Well, as far as the evacuation order, the Israelis want to clear out basically the city of Rafah, which is a big city in Gaza on the border with Egypt. And this is reminiscent of maybe what we saw a year ago, almost a year ago, last May, when Israel launched a major offensive in Rafah. So these people, the Palestinians, perhaps tens of thousands, have been ordered to move to an area about 6 miles away, a so-called safe zone. But it apparently signals that Israel could be planning another major ground assault on Rafah. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying over the weekend that Israel is going to ramp up the military pressure on Hamas until it agrees to release the Israeli hostages.
All right, so let's talk about those hostages and this latest effort to secure a ceasefire. What are you hearing?
Well, Hamas said that it's ready to release 5 Israeli hostages, both living and dead, under an Egyptian proposal. But the Israelis immediately rejected that and came up with a counter proposal. They said 5 hostages living and dead simply isn't enough. They want the release of 11 living hostages, and half of the dead hostages which would be something like 17 bodies. So indirect negotiations are still going on, but the gaps are still really wide.
There's also this, Robert. Israeli police have made 2 arrests in connection with an investigation into ties between Qatar and the office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Very strange story. What more can you tell us?
Well, this is being dubbed Qatargate, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today being summoned by police for questioning in that affair that's really been simmering, and now it's turned into a big story domestically here in Israel. 2 aides arrested for allegedly taking secret payments from Qatar while that country was negotiating a ceasefire and hostage talks between Israel and Hamas. Now, it's not clear what Netanyahu's involvement or knowledge of this was, but he's calling it a witch hunt, as are other Likud officials in his party. But it's certainly providing plenty of cannon fodder for Netanyahu's opponents who are hoping to topple him from power.
All right, Robert Berger for us reporting from Jerusalem today. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
The FAA is investigating another close call at Reagan National Airport, this time involving an Air Force jet and a commercial flight. It wasn't the only close call at the airport this weekend. CBS News senior transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve has more.
This morning, the FAA is investigating what happened at Washington's Reagan National Airport Friday. Delta Flight 2983 had just taken off from Minneapolis with 136 aboard when its pilots got a collision avoidance alert calling for evasive maneuvers. The reason? 4 Air Force T-38 jets were streaking towards a flyover at Arlington National Cemetery at about 350 miles an hour.
Was there an actual aircraft about 500 feet below us as we came off of DCA? Got 998 affirmative.
At their closest point, the planes were about 6,000 feet apart horizontally and vertically separated by about 275 feet.
Once again, we have a conflict between a military aircraft and a civilian airliner, and that's not acceptable.
Just a day earlier, acting FAA Administrator Chris Rushello insisted flying was safe, but acknowledged there were so many close calls between airliners and helicopters, often from the military, at DCA over the last 13 years. The FAA should have seen the danger before January's mid-air collision killed 67 people.
Something was missed at the DCA crash. I take that seriously. I take that upon myself.
NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy.
I wouldn't just put that on the FAA. I'd also put that on the Army.
Saturday, as this United flight with 131 on board was landing at DCA, pilots told air traffic control they may have hit a kite. The 737 landed safely and was undamaged. I'm Chris Van Cleve.
All right, Elon Musk has put millions of dollars into Wisconsin's Supreme Court race. We'll explain why he's doing that next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following this morning. The FBI is looking for the person who set fire to New Mexico's Republican Party headquarters yesterday. The party says it was a, quote, deliberate act of arson. The fire damaged the building's entrance in Albuquerque. The words ICE equals KKK were also spray painted on the side of the building. In Minnesota, investigators are working to determine what caused a small plane to fall out of the sky and crash into a home near Minneapolis. This happened on Saturday in the town of Brooklyn Park. The pilot was the only person believed to be on board and was killed. U.S. Bank released a statement saying they believe the pilot as their vice chair and chief administration officer, Terry Dolan. A person inside the home was able to get out safely. And a court in Paris has found the leader of the country's far-right National Rally Party, Marine Le Pen, guilty of embezzlement. She was convicted of misappropriating EU funds for party expenses between 2004 and 2016. Le Pen has denied any wrongdoing. This verdict has taken her out of the running for France's presidential election in the 2027 election year. She had been widely seen as a frontrunner, but is now banned from running for public office. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is returning from a diplomatic trip to Asia, but the controversy surrounding the Signal app chat has not died down. A congressional committee has vowed to investigate the incident, but over the weekend, President Trump said no one would be fired. I want to bring in CBS News Pentagon reporter Eleanor Watson for more on this. So Ellie, you were on that trip. What did you learn?
Yeah, Vlad, well, the purpose of the trip was to visit troops and countries crucial to the Defense Department's goal of deterring China. The trip started in Hawaii, which is the headquarters for all U.S. forces in the Pacific, then went to Guam, which Hegseth called the tip of the spear for U.S. defense in the Pacific. Then he visited his counterparts in the Philippines and Japan. Hegseth, on his trip, made it a point each morning to work out with different troops, which is different than his predecessor, but the meeting with counterparts builds on the efforts of the previous administration. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, during his tenure, despite the wars in Ukraine and in Israel, visited Asia 12 times, the most traveled region of his tenure. This was Secretary Hegseth's first trip to the Indo-Pacific, but I expect many more in the months to come.
He couldn't escape, though, Ellie, questions about the Signal chat, even though he was halfway around the world. There's also been some reporting that he's had his wife sitting in on meetings that are generally unusual to have a wife who has no security clearance to be sitting in on with other foreign leaders. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the signal story dropped while we were on the plane to our first stop to Hawaii. So he got off the plane, bashed the reporter who did nothing but get added to the chat, and then said that nobody was texting war plans. He repeated that message even after the Atlantic released the receipts, which showed that at the very least he had texted sensitive details about strikes before those strikes happened. Others in the chat, like Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, have called the chat a mistake, but so far Hegseth has not apologized or called it a mistake. You mentioned his wife, Jennifer Hegseth, the Wall Street Journal, reporting that she was in on sensitive information. She heard sensitive information in meetings. We yelled questions at Secretary Hegseth about that as well, but it looks like on both the Signal chat and the meetings his wife attended, he is going to continue to deflect on questions about both of those stories, despite coming to the Pentagon and promising that he would be the one to restore accountability.
Yeah, what's wild too, Ellie, is that some of those cabinet officials, as you know, were up on the Hill last week answering questions, and it appears that I mean, just from listening to those briefings and those hearings, that they may have perjured themselves in suggesting that, for example, no war plans, and those are semantic issues, right? War versus attack or battle plans were on that Signal chat. So this is really interesting to see how the Republican-controlled Congress will handle this. My guess is there's probably not going to be anything done, since the president himself sees this as not something to hold anyone accountable. So we'll see. We'll continue to rely on your reporting. Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you.
All right, with new tariffs set to take effect this week, many would-be car owners are concerned that the price of new cars are about to jump. CBS News national correspondent Lana Zak spent the weekend in Kimball, Minnesota, where one car dealer says he's concerned about what happens next.
At the high school here in Kimball, Minnesota, the community's gathered to support the robotics team, enjoy some dancing, and test drive cars.
Is this going to be your new car? I hope so, to be able to afford a new vehicle.
Steve Mouse, co-owner of AM Mouse & Son, is donating $20 to a robotics scholarship for every person who test drives a car today, including me.
Is this an all-American vehicle?
Yes, but that's actually a really good question. Like, for instance, the Wrangler on the show floor is built in Toledo, Ohio, and there's a number of parts made in Mexico.
This is the last weekend to buy a car before President Trump's threatened tariffs on foreign cars and car parts goes into effect. Right now, the average price of a new car is nearly $50,000. Tariffs are expected to make that number jump by $5 to $10K.
It seems like now would be a good time to pull the trigger.
Experts warn the tariffs will increase the price of new and used cars, even auto parts.
This is a fairly significant tariff because it's across the entire auto industry. There's not a car that's completely immune.
Here in Kimball, Mouse says many buyers are trying to lock in a pre-tariff price, but it's also having a chilling effect too.
I am concerned that just the thought of these tariffs is going to cause hesitation for our buyers.
I always like to have something newer, but with the price of things, it's just kind of think you better just hang on to what we have.
Here in GOP Congressman Tom Emmer's district, a lot of the people I spoke with said even if they don't support Trump's permanent tariffs, they still support the president. And I want to show you this. All of these American cars carry this sticker that show a lot of their parts came from another country. Lana Zak, CBS News, Kimball, Minnesota.
Protesters showed up at more than 200 Tesla showrooms worldwide over the weekend in a so-called Tesla takedown. Demonstrators rallied against Elon Musk and the flurry of government cuts. I want to bring in CBS News correspondent Tom Hansen, who's at a Tesla dealership right here in New York City. So, Tom, what more can you tell us about these protests and how they were organized?
Yeah, well, Vlad, really what we saw over the weekend were grassroots protests that played out a lot on social media when it came to rallying people to gather at Tesla showrooms like the one that is behind us. You can actually see that there are still police barricades up from the events over the weekend. There's also a shattered door at this one. Now, we went inside. They told us that that was actually from a protest a few weeks ago, but you can tell that, you know, this is a growing target for protesters. And really what the impetus behind this protest is They are calling on people who own Tesla vehicles to sell their Tesla vehicles. They are calling on investors who to sell off their stocks and, just to speak out. Really, the goal here is to hit Elon Musk in the pocketbooks, to really take a financial toll on what they say is an unconstitutional role that he is taking on, heading up the DOGE, cuts that we're seeing across the federal government, cuts that they say are hasty, cuts that they say are reckless in some ways. And so what we saw over the weekend were hundreds of protests across the country. You mentioned some 200 showrooms where protesters showed up. Here, there were roughly 100 people outside of here on Saturday, but we're talking about states that are red, states that are blue. We're talking about elected officials showing up at these protests in Texas and Seattle. We saw representatives there showing up. And then, of course, civilians who say that they are not happy with the way that the government is being run at the helm of DOGE. Vlad.
And how is Elon Musk responding, Tom?
Yeah, well, he took to X over the weekend, and he said it is time to arrest those funding the attacks. Arresting their puppets and paid foot soldiers won't stop the violence. Now, I want to zoom out here a little bit and talk about some of the headwinds that Tesla has been facing over the last several weeks. We have seen their stock value decline by about 50%. In addition to that, we are talking about a growing electrical vehicle market. And additionally, there have been targeted attacks against Tesla vehicles. I'm sure you've seen over recent weeks this bumper sticker that has come out for some Tesla owners where they are saying, we bought this Tesla before Elon Musk took over or took this role at DOGE. And so really what we're seeing is a growing display of dissent, and that is coming in the form of these attacks on some Tesla vehicles, these protests outside of Tesla showrooms. I also want to mention that last week, Pam Bondi came out and said that she would treat these kinds of attacks, these kinds of acts of vandalism as terrorism crimes. And so, that really sets the tone for what we're seeing here on the ground, Vlad.
All right, Tom Hansen for us outside a Tesla dealership this morning. Thanks, Tom. All right, back to weather now. The Atlantic coast is bracing for rough weather. Let's bring back CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Kate Vallow with another look at the national forecast. Hey, Kate.
Good morning to you, Vlad. Yeah, we are watching it closely. Even here in Philadelphia, we have the Phillies home opener today sold out, and we have storms moving in during the course of the game. So some dangerous weather possible along the eastern seaboard. I also want to show you what's happening right now across the south. In fact, this is our radar loop for the past 3 hours. And you can see these storms moving through portions of southern Louisiana, Mississippi, and just now starting to move into Alabama and Georgia. This northern edge is then going to fill in later on this evening, impacting cities like D.C., Philadelphia, and New York City with damaging wind and very, very heavy rain. Let's take a look at our severe threat today. This is from the Storm Prediction Center. Greatest risk of severe weather where you see this orange shading, including Atlanta or just east of Atlanta down toward New Orleans and right into the Florida Panhandle. These are the areas that are under the greatest risk for potential tornadoes with this system. But this slight risk, level 2, rises all the way up to New York City. So we'll take the map down. Let's walk over to our monitor and kind of take you through it, because it's not just today. This is a severe threat that's going to linger even into tomorrow as another storm moves out into the plains. And this could set up kind of a multi-day flash flood threat across portions of the plains. So here's round 1. You can see it reaches the eastern seaboard later on this evening. This is about 7 o'clock, moving off the coast by after midnight. Heavy rainfall and again, the threat for damaging wind and tornadoes there. Here's our next system, and this is going to produce some snow for portions of northern Minnesota. Spring snowfall there for the first day of April, not an April Fool's joke. Here is the line of storms that's going to start to push east in the afternoon and bring yet another round of severe weather. So again, a recap. Here are the areas most at risk for severe weather today, where you see that brown shading. Tomorrow, it includes Kansas City down toward Dallas. And then as that same system moves east, another round, an enhanced risk for cities like Chicago, Little Rock, and Nashville by Wednesday. Vlad, I'll send it back over to you.
All right, Kate, thank you. There's a new trial starting today for Lori Vallow Daybell. She's already convicted of killing her 2 children. Now she faces a trial for allegedly plotting to kill her ex-husband. We'll have a preview next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. In Arizona, jury selection has started for the new trial of the so-called doomsday mom, Lori Vallow Daybell. She's accused of plotting to kill her ex-husband, Charles Vallow, 2 years ago. She was convicted of murdering her children. CBS News reporter Andres Gutierrez has more from Phoenix.
Lori Vallow Daybell is accused of conspiring to kill her then-husband, Charles Vallow, in July 2019. Alexander Cox, Vallow Daybell's brother, called 911 telling police he shot Charles Vallow in self-defense after an altercation at Lori Vallow Daybell's Arizona home. Charles Vallow died, and then Cox died months later from what authorities said were natural causes.
The prosecution is trying to prove that Lori Vallow and her brother conspired together to kill her fourth of 5 husbands. She is charged as a conspirator.
Vallow Daybell and her 5th husband, Chad Daybell, first made headlines in 2019 for their bizarre behavior and so-called doomsday beliefs while her children Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow were missing. Their bodies were eventually found on Chad Daybell's Idaho property.
Guilty.
In 2023, an Idaho judge sentenced Vallow Daybell to life without parole for their murders. Chad Daybell was sentenced to death for his role in the killings, though his attorney has filed an appeal over that sentence. The pair were also convicted for insurance fraud and their part in the death of Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife before Lori. Vallow Daybell was extradited to Arizona for trial over the death of her ex-husband, where she recently denied murdering her children during a contentious jailhouse interview with NBC's Dateline.
I'm asking you a question. Did you watch your children die?
That's a really sad question.
It's a terrible question, and it's one I hate to have to ask.
I was not there, as you know.
While this new trial is set to begin, it's unclear if Vallow Daybell's past in Idaho will impact jury selection in Arizona.
Any prospective juror can raise their hand and say, I've read all about it, I've watched it on TV. If you say you can be fair and impartial and follow the rules of law as stated by the judge, you're available to be a juror.
We got some breaking news to report. We told you last week about those 3 soldiers who went missing in Lithuania. They have now, sadly, tragically been found dead. Search and rescue recovery efforts are still underway for the last remaining soldier. Lithuanian officials say a U.S. armored vehicle went missing during a training exercise last week west of the border with Belarus. It was retrieved from a swamp after a 6-day search. Hundreds of Lithuanian and U.S. personnel have been part of the search. We'll continue to follow the story and, of course, bring you updates as we learn them. Meanwhile, Elon Musk has pumped more than $20 million into a Wisconsin election, going so far as to hand out million-dollar checks to 2 voters yesterday. It made the race to fill a seat on the state Supreme Court the most expensive judicial election in American history. Let's bring in CBS News political director Finn Gomez to talk about this. So, Finn, explain to our audience who is perhaps not familiar with judicial elections why Elon Musk is so focused on this particular race, which is a race not between members of Congress, but between 2 justices, 2 judges.
Yeah, Vlad. So one, it is the first electoral test since the beginning of the Trump administration. We are 70 days into the Trump administration, and this is the first real test to see how it's impacting voters, how it's impacting people in these critical battleground states. If you recall, Vlad, Wisconsin was a state that President Trump flipped back in November. It is considered a battleground state. But the Supreme Court is likely to consider several hot-button issues in the coming years, Vlad: abortion rights, the ability of labor unions to organize state workers, and perhaps most critically, going into next year, congressional redistricting. His critics say Musk is getting involved for self-interest, though, Vlad. He is suing over its law forcing. Wisconsin has a law forcing automakers like Tesla to use franchise auto dealers to sell vehicles. Tesla sells vehicles directly to customers, and the issue may one day end up before, you guessed it, Vlad, the Wisconsin State Supreme Court.
Well, as you know, groups had tried to prevent Elon Musk from handing out those million checks. For people who don't understand this, is it okay to do that? Is it perhaps it's legal, but is it ethical? And explain what happened.
Many critics, many Democrats that we've spoken to and who've been really outspoken on this issue in Wisconsin and nationally say that it is at the very least unethical. The Attorney General in Wisconsin, a Democrat, did sue to get this to sue Musk over this, and did ask for the Wisconsin Supreme Court to hear this case. However, the Supreme Court in this case rejected to hear this, so therefore it is being allowed. But there are many critics of this action. If you recall, Vlad, this also occurred in the lead up to the November election in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, where Elon Musk did something very similar in handing out checks to prospective voters.
All right, Finn Gomez breaking it down for us this morning. Thanks, Finn. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
From 64 to the Final Four. And just for the second time in the tournament's history, the last team standing are all number one seeds. A preview of the matchups next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. All of the number one seeds in the men's NCAA men's basketball tournament have now advanced to the Final Four, and they all have a shot at bringing home the title. CBS News Miami sports anchor Mike Cunio has a breakdown of the matchups later this week on CBS.
Welcome into CBS Center Court. I hope you're not afraid of heights, because Bracket Mountain keeps getting taller and taller now that we've knocked 64 teams out of the field of 68. That's right, we're down to just 4. Now, I want to backtrack to about 2 weeks ago when we were talking about the number one seeds on Selection Sunday. Here they were: Auburn, Duke, Houston, and Florida. These 4 are still standing. That's right. For the first time since 2008, all number one seeds are making it to the national semifinal. So if you took all chalk in your bracket, you're doing really well. Now, here's what's to come on Saturday. When the tournament started, we had 14 teams from the SEC make it into the big dance. Well, 2 are remaining, and Auburn and Florida, those are those 2, they've made it to the Final Four game against each other. So we are guaranteed at least one SEC team in the title game. Auburn won the regular season title in the conference. Meanwhile, Florida won the SEC tournament. Now, as for the other game, we've got Duke and we've got Houston, 2 teams who are no strangers to the Final Four. Houston has been there 7 times, but that doesn't hold a candle to what Duke has done historically. This is their 18th Final Four appearance. They are looking for their first national title under head coach John Shire. We'll see if they can get it done. But all this happening next Saturday on CBS. That's going to do it from Center Court. I'm Mike Cunio.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. All right, let's bring back CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Kate Vallow with the last look at the national forecast. Hey, Kate.
Hey, Vlad. Let's talk about what's happening today, because a lot of areas along the eastern seaboard looking at the threat for severe weather today into tonight, and it's ongoing across portions of the south this morning. Look at this line of thunderstorms. The same system that brought deadly severe weather to portions of the Central Plains this weekend, now it's moving through the deep south and down toward New Orleans. We've got a number of watches and warnings. You can see the blue. That is a flash flood warning. We also have flash flood warnings in northern Mississippi. As these storms move east, they're tapping into some very warm, very unstable air and will turn even more severe as the afternoon progresses. We'll see these move along the eastern seaboard as well, the northern edge filling in. So from New York City down through Philadelphia, D.C., eventually into the Carolinas, these storms will fire up later on this evening, and they will bring the risk for damaging wind, large hail, and even isolated tornadoes. We've got another storm that's moving into the northern plains tomorrow with yet another risk of severe weather. This is a very typical spring pattern. We're going to be dealing with a kind of a progressive pattern over the coming days, storm after storm and severe threat after severe threat. So today it's maximized over the Carolinas, Georgia, and southern Mississippi and Alabama. Tomorrow we see a severe threat, a level 2 out of 5. For Kansas City down through Dallas. And then on Wednesday, that shifts over the Midwest, and cities like Chicago, St. Louis, and Nashville will see yet another round of severe weather. Vlad, back to you.
All right, Kate, thank you very much. That does it for me, folks. But stay right where you are. After the break, Mugo Odiwe is live from San Francisco with all the news breaking from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.